Okay, so I'm gonna do a reaction video, commentary video on Curt and Wolfgang's latest discussion because I think Wolfgang is very, very close. He he sees and understands that there's something fundamentally wrong with science, physics, and mathematics, and even philosophy. Uh, what's the common thread that all of these systems, institutions are constructed of? Well, it's thought, right? So he's really close, and I sincerely am doing this with respect, and the guy knows what he's talking about, but he just doesn't quite go far enough. Reminds me of Bohm and Krishnamurti talking for multiple dozens of hours basically about basically this same issue from a different kind of perspective, but they never get to the point. And the point is, it's thought. It is the voice in your head that is the problem. The voice in everybody's head is the problem, but David Bohm wouldn't go there. Well, Krishnamurti himself really didn't quite go there, but anyway. And Wolfgang doesn't go that far either, even though he knows of the sadhus and what are they doing? That's exactly what they're doing to get into their state, is that they're just transcending thought. So I'm a little surprised that Wolfgang, well, I'm not surprised because it's tough to go that far, but here we go. It's going to be a long time, and I'm going to fast forward as much as I can because this is a 3 hour long video, and if I commentary on it, it's going to be 18 hours maybe. No. All right, here we go.
What is the omega point?
Well, I think the expression goes back to Teilhard de Chardin, was a very, very interesting
Yeah, I don't care about this guy.
character. In fact, it was, in my opinion, absolutely upside down. And
it being the omega point?
His science fiction theology. I mean, the omega point was just one.
Maybe I'm not interested in
of
that.
A completely new way of approaching.
Is Satan capable of telling the truth, or can he only lie?
Well, I would guess that he is capable of saying the truth when it serves his purpose. So even if he says the truth, it is for the purpose of spreading lies. But make no mistake about it. People nowadays tend not to understand that. The devil is not a fable, it's not a theological fantasy. It's as real and solid a reality as Mount Everest. And it is one of the greatest forces operating in the world, because it is really, in a sense, a counterforce to God.
Okay, but there cannot be a counterforce to God because God is the omnipotent, the only power, if you will. So if it were completely equal, if Satan's power were completely equal to God's power, then there'd always be a standoff and no one would ever win. It would just be constant battle, wouldn't it? So everyone has this intuition that good, whatever that is, the power that is good and not Satan, is the most powerful force in reality, right? So the way it is that it's not so much a battle, right? So in a game, there requires an opponent, right? But if you're the only being in existence, that opponent is going to be you, isn't it? So in a way, you have to somehow pretend or forget or construct something that limits you in some sort of way. So Satan is just you. Satan is God acting. And God acting could be what Wolfgang is trying to describe, I believe, because I'm always trying to put it into a state that what they're describing must be an expression of one's direct experience all of the time. It has to be a fractal or a hologram of the reality.
We all agree, no doubt, that God is all powerful and the prime power more powerful than anything else.
So why the struggle?
Granted.
Why is there an apparent struggle? It's because it's a
The
game. Why would there be any apparent struggle if God is the most powerful being? He would always beat, if he's the best arm wrestler in the world, with both hands. There's no one that would ever beat him, not even Superman, right? So it has to be an aspect of acting, playing, forgetting, right? You getting what I'm saying is, or some sort of limitation constructed on your own beingness.
Negative of God, the
So it's
negation of God, which we curse.
so this is why this state that everyone is having such a hard problem describing for reality, for eternity, for all of history, is because it's the same being, right? It's how can there be God who is loving and omnipotent and omnipresent and all that stuff, and yet all this crazy shit going on and struggle and an idea of Satan? It's because it's the same being. It's all you that has forgotten or that is playing or acting.
Well, Satan comes in second place. And compared to our
Because
human
the actor always goes, the
intelligence
character
and the
always
sheer
goes
power of
away
Satan
when the
is
actor stops
mounting.
acting.
This is one of the deficiencies, I believe, of contemporary quote-unquote religion. I'm talking mainly to the Christian, or the Judeo-Christian branch of religion, that the idea of Satan has been pretty much lost. In earlier times, I think Christians were more keenly aware of the satanic side of the cosmos.
See, again, this is too positive and negative, right? It's too dualistic.
And who were therefore more on God.
It's,
I think
as I say in my
the
work,
so-called
it's other of, not other than.
mythologizing movement that
Other of is the opponent in the game. You need something in which to push against, something that restricts you in order to play a game. So that's all that Satan is.
Curt himself was in a sense representing, because he was destroying Orthodox Christianity, Orthodox belief, and replacing it by that science fiction theology of his, which, as I say, was demonic.
Let's make an analogy. we are like a finite number, just a finite cardinality. And then there's Satan, which is the countably infinite. And then there's God, which is not only uncountably infinite, but perhaps the highest of all the infinities, like Cantor studied them. So even if Satan, compared to us, is infinite, is extremely powerful, compared to God, Satan is nothing. Is that the case?
Well, I don't think that from a theological point of view.
Well, the character is nothing in compared to the actor, right? But when the actor is acting, especially if they're a really, really good actor, then there is the appearance of the character. And if the audience goes along with it, which is also God, then you've got the whole system works. If everyone is in agreement that we're here playing and in a theater, then that's the only way that it works, is that everyone realizes that it's not so real.
One can really think of it that way because if you look at the matter from a still higher perspective, it turns out, A, that Satan is necessary.
To play a game, right?
And B,
This is a game. You need an
that
opponent.
unwittingly, Satan is contributing to the work of God.
Yeah, because
Henson Shaving is a family-owned aerospace parts manufacturer that's made parts for the
we're not
International
doing
Space.
ads.
So, a negative force is needed.
Okay, but not negative as in equal to the positive, because that would cancel. If God is the positive, let's say, which is what Christianity takes it to be, because Christianity is so materialistic, right? Based. To accomplish the will of God. So if you destroy your opponent completely, then the game is over. So, and also destroying the opponent could be just when the actor decides to stop acting, right? So there's different analogies that work here, but what he's saying is I agree, but what he's describing is the state of playing a game.
The will of God.
So when you pray, do you ever give thanks for Satan?
Oh.
No, but it would make sense. It would not be in any way amiss, because Satan is there as a necessary ingredient.
See, but this is an omnipotent absolute being would not require anything, right? It's absolute. It's ridiculous to say that God would require anything. So this is why I keep saying that it's entertainment, right? The awareness, doesn't require anything relative to it, but it apparently has some sort of free will or creative abilities.
You see, you might naively and at the same time wisely ask the question, well, if God wants to give us this infinite gift, which we call salvation, eternal life, why doesn't He just give it to us? Instead of letting us struggle in a world that is full of pain and misery, and also, worse even than that, carries within it the danger of damnation. Why has God so arranged it? Why doesn't He just give us whatever He has as a present? Which ultimately it is. It is a present.
It's presence.
Well, I think the answer to that is that God can do all things just by his own will. He can create the world, and he has created the world by his own will. But there is one thing that God cannot do simply by his will. And that is, he cannot give us the highest gift, salvation, because salvation is somewhat akin to God himself. And this is something that simply cannot be given. Even God cannot do this. If God could give us salvation just by his word, I think it stands to reason that he would certainly do so. Why make us suffer, and why make us run the risk?
Why make us? That's the big question, is why make us? And it's to engage, to entertain itself with itself.
Of damnation.
But
Is that risk?
the game is the damnation, you see? The game is the damnation. This is the damnation. Right? It's not that it's a horrible existence, it's that you're in a labyrinth. You're living in a delusion, in a mystery that needs to be solved. So this is the damnation.
Risk is there. Every Christian teacher has corroborated that. And the answer is, I believe, that salvation is, in a sense, a participation in the divinity. And this is something that cannot be just given. You have to earn it. I wish I could do a better job.
There's something to do. Yeah, you
Getting
have
that
to
point
do
across.
something.
It's something that I feel very deeply, but I hope that these few words are sufficient to indicate what I'm trying to express.
There's some views of God that God can do anything, including contradictions. So you don't believe this. There are some things God cannot do.
Yeah.
In this realm.
Yeah. He cannot give salvation to an unrepentant murderer.
You just pulled that out of your butt, basically,
So,
Wolfgang.
The ascent to God, the invitation from God to man, come into my sphere, be one of us, enter the kingdom of God. That invitation cannot be given, so to speak, gratis. It is something that you have to, in some way, in some sense, earn. These things, of course, are hard to explain. We're dealing with supernatural things.
It's a game.
So it's very,
It's
very
not hard to
difficult
describe.
to express it, and very difficult to understand what I'm trying to say. But I think the Christian listener will sense what I'm saying, and I think he is likely to recognize that this is true.
Do you fear death?
As a natural man, certainly, yes, certainly. Absolutely, because we have not reached the stage of sainthood. We've all read the lives of many, many saints. We have some idea of what they're like. And it is, in my belief, only in a high level of sainthood that the fear of death is transcended. It's not a simple thing.
So my model does away with the fear of death because it points out that we are the absolute, We are the singularity, the superposition from which the appearance of body and mind arise. So when you realize that you are life itself, which is indicated in the fundamental model of reality, that's what it's saying. It's saying that we are all the divine and life itself, existence itself, presence, then that is the way to transcend the fear of death. You need to find out what you really are, and that is beyond the thought process.
And ordinary Christian faith is wonderful, and it's a sine qua non. We need it, otherwise we have nothing. But it doesn't instantly elevate us to great spiritual heights. It's something that you have to work on a lifetime.
You can be a Christian
There are millions
for a
and
lifetime
millions of
and get
Christians of all
nowhere,
denominations
nowhere
and creeds,
spiritually.
but only a handful in every generation.
And this is because Christianity says nothing about stilling the voice in your head. Nothing. And this is why Christianity is the least effective, the last religion, and the least effective. Because it's basically a religion that was born at the end of Kali Yuga. It's the last major religion, we'll call it. It's not effective. You should probably not bother to call yourself a Christian anymore and try to follow
Reaches
that
the
stuff.
level of true sainthood.
It's not
And
worth
this is
trying to salvage.
something-
You just gotta ditch it.
It's not a matter of degree, it's a matter of kind. It isn't that we have a numerical scale and then we say above this number it's sainthood. No, because sainthood is something generically different from the ordinary condition of man. And and incidentally, sainthood is rare, and in my life, I have met only one person who is bona fide a saint. And he is as much different from any other person I've ever met in the world. It's almost as if he were a different species. So many Christians, I think, have somewhat inadequate ideas of what makes a saint. A saint isn't simply somebody who is very, very good and lives a very, very good life.
Something I've been thinking about is we say, well, what is a saint? Or what is a theory of everything? What is a so-and-so? And then I wonder, well, what is? What does is mean?
You've got me there, Curt.
Is. I think I have something written on that, but I think it's on that computer, and if I mess with that computer that's making this video, I'll probably stop the video. What is? Is the most direct route that Maya takes to try to link the thought realm with the physical realm. Or a thought to another thought.
I've never thought about that. I realized that it is a very, very deep question, one of the deepest questions. So, as I understand it, it's the same as asking what is being.
That's right. Part of the definition has to do with being. has to do with the bodhisattva. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly,
Bodhisattva.
which is an Eastern concept. And so the word is that we use scientifically and secularly actually has the deepest religious roots.
Absolutely. In fact, it reminds me of a passage in the Old Testament, Exodus 3:14. And let me remind you what that is. It pertains to the episode of Moses and the burning bush. Moses, I forget the outer details, he sees a burning bush and he asks the question. He realizes this must be the presence of God here. It was something miraculous. And so Moses asked God his name. He said, "What is your name?" And the answer that came was, to put it in Latin, ego sum qui sum, which literally means I am that is. I am. So here you have the answer to your question about is. This is basically what Moses asked God, the episode of the burning bush. And God's answer to that question was,
Being is being. But it seems like it's being incorrectly utilized, is. But it should be the frame of reference from which everything is measured, which is I am.
ego sum qui sum. So there is no being, strictly speaking, other than God.
Okay, there is no being other than God. So if I'm a being, then I must be God. Right, Wolfgang? There is no being other than God.
The creation is sort of, I would say, a half being, a semi-being. You cannot say of anything in creation, for example, of ourselves, that it is. God alone can say that, strictly speaking. I cannot say I am.
Okay, but here's the problem, right? I remember. With is, there can be an is not. But with being, there really is no opposite. It's ridiculous to have a statement, I am not. That statement can never be true. I am not can never be true.
Because from a rigorous metaphysical point of view, this isn't really true. We have a certain being, but it is not sufficient to say I am, because in truth, only God can say that.
But we project the appearance that we are not God by elaborating on that. We just don't say, I am, right? The voice in our head doesn't stop there. It goes, I am Wolfgang Smith. I am Roy Dobson. I am bald. I am 6 feet tall. I am going to do this. I am not going to do this. I did this. I didn't do that. Right? Everything is I, ... So Wolfgang, the practice is to actually engage in this and to not let the mind wander and create the appearance of the ego.
And this is, of course, the whole purpose of our religious quest.
Is to
If you
realize
want to put
your
it
divinity.
in very, very metaphysical terms, we are seeking to be. We are sort of in a halfway state now. Incidentally, the Vedic tradition has understood this very well. This is why they speak of Maya, because every Brahmin boy in India used to understand that we're not fully, we do not fully exist. And this.
But you can't say that. You can't be half existing. What you're talking about is obviously one of the mind-body aspects, right? So you're contradicting yourself, Wolfgang, because you would never say I don't exist or I'm half of a being, right? He's contradicting his own irreducible wholeness shtick by saying that he himself, the self, whatever Wolfgang Smith is, his being.
This is, of course, the message that you got from Buddha is perhaps the first historical figure that gives us this message. And then it was the message of the Vedic sages for thousands of years. And it is absolutely in keeping with Exodus 3:14.
As Ramana Maharshi taught.
As a matter of fact, I think
that is the highest
when I think
level of
back
truth, as I
to
am.
India that I witnessed 50 years ago, I think the people that I knew there would understand better Exodus 3:14 than our theologians in the West, because they're more rooted in these fundamental teachings.
When someone says, I am John, I am Mary, I am Carlos, what do you mean that they can't say I am?
Yeah.
Well, in ordinary
You just can't
parlance, of
say
course,
the last part. You can't say the name. Right? That is the false part. That is the illusory part. That is the ego, the name.
I am has a very simple meaning that we all understand once we are no longer an infant. But this theological or metaphysical idea of being is something else. And in fact, you know, there is a hard and fast distinction between two levels of understanding religion. And that applies to Christianity or any other religion that may exist. There's an ordinary, simple way of understanding that every child can understand, and there is a deeper understanding, an understanding which many people belonging to that religion never attain. And I will give you an example of that. One of my absolutely favorite theologians is St. Augustine. And St. Augustine wrote a sort of an autobiography which he called The Confessions. And one
Well,
of
that's
the
a fun
chapters
title.
of the Confessions begins with these words. I like it so much that I even know them by heart. He's speaking to God, and he says, I see these others beneath thee, an existence they have because they are from thee, yet no existence because they are not what thou art. I love that saying.
So basically, I think that he's describing the state of looking in a mirror and saying that God is the reality, the three-dimensional object being that's looking into the mirror, and the reflection is dependent upon the two-dimensional projection. Reflection is dependent upon the three-dimensional object, but it's not the other way around.
It is pure esotericism because many people simply won't understand what he's talking about.
And it can be misinterpreted.
It can certainly be misinterpreted. But when you do even vaguely sense what St. Augustine was saying there, it is profound. It is absolutely esoteric, and incidentally, what St. Augustine was saying in this particular statement is something that the people in India, the people who are rooted in the old Indian tradition, assuming there are still such people left, they would understand it far better than most of us here in Christianity, because the Vedic tradition has been harping on that theme for thousands of years. This is the idea of Maya. The things of the world, including ourselves as in our phenomenal existence, both are and are not.
But this is not the self. See, he is contradicting himself all the time, because he said he would agree that we are, I'm sure he would say that we are beings, right?
In a sense, we are, because we are from God. Otherwise, in no wise would we exist. And yet, we are not, because ego sum qui sum, God alone really is.
The actor alone really is, the dreamer alone really is, right? The dream is not,
Interesting, because
but
when
it
last we
exists.
spoke,
It's
someone
not
asked,
real.
I read the question of, is God both being and non-being? And you said yes. So, at the same time, we are both being and non-being.
Excuse me, Curt. Let me try to understand
We are.
what I said last.
So from this perspective, we are both being and non-being, because this part goes away, but the spirit part, the mind-body part goes away, but the spirit part doesn't. But from the absolute perspective, there's only being.
Last week, because it doesn't really sound like me to say that God is both being and non-being.
Yeah, well, I can reread the question for you.
Please do, because
God
at
is
the
the
moment
potential
I don't quite
and what manifests
understand what
out of that
was
potential.
what I meant to say.
This question comes from Matthew Wyden. He said, Western religion.
Or you could have a separation between God and reality, I guess. That's tricky.
Talk about reality as being ultimately the supreme being, an inexhaustible intelligence, sentience, whereas St. Maximus joined these and said God is both being and non-being. So what do you think about these different ways of describing reality? And then you said St. Maximus was right, that God is both being and non-being. Or maybe in the context of the question you meant something else, or there was more there.
Of course, we need to recognize fundamentally that even being is a thought. So, to elaborate on what being is going to probably get into uncertainty.
Well,
So, when an actor is acting, there's being and non-being. The actor is being the character.
I understand now what
But
I
the
was
actor is the beingness, and the
trying at least
character
to say,
is the illusion,
and it is this, that
the non-existing. It doesn't really exist, does it? It's just pretend. The character is pretend.
God is beyond our conception of being. One might say this is all you know on earth and all you need to know, but it does not exhaust.
And it's what's going on here is actually important because it's all fractal. It's all a hologram of your direct experience.
God, because God is inexhaustible. And so,
But it limits.
I was a moment ago distinguishing between esotericism and the ordinary way of understanding religion. I should add that there are different levels of esotericism. I mean, and in a sense, esotericism has no boundaries. However high you have gone in your conception of God, there's always more.
So that's why you need to
And
stop.
you never can reach the point where you say, well, now I know who God is. That is impossible. And in fact, anyone who says this gives proof of the fact that he has a long way to go.
I think you mean intellectually, to know it, to know God intellectually and be able to describe it. If someone says that they know all of that, yes, they are incorrect. But you can know what you are, and you can describe that as best you can.
I think there have been great spiritual masters who would simply say, God is inexpressible.
The Tao.
If you ask me, I cannot tell you. There's a wonderful story in one of the Upanishads. A man has two sons, and when they come of age, he sends them, as used to be the custom, to a guru. So these two sons spend the next few years away from the father and mother in the house of the guru. And so then they come back after a few years to the father, and the father says to them, well, tell me, son, what have you learned about God? And so the older son gets up and explains to the father what he has learned and gives a very beautiful, learned lecture of Vedanta about Saguna Brahman and Nirguna Brahman and so on. And the father listens and says nothing. And then he turns to the younger son and says, young son, tell me, what have you learned? And this young man speaks not a word and just lowers his head in silence. And the father is pleased. He says, you have had a glimpse of Brahman. I love this story because I think it tells something that is very, very important in the most perfect way of all. Not trying to express it directly, but by implication. It makes it all that more powerful.
So then, why don't you engage in that, Wolfgang? It wasn't just silence of blah, blah, blah. It was silence up here. And I believe this is the obstacle that your teaching cannot overcome because you have not engaged in the practice of transcending thought and silencing the voice in your head. If you have, you haven't made mention that you've engaged in such a practice.
This reminds me of another story from early Christendom. I forget which one of the church fathers said this. There was 3 disciples or 3 sons, and they were being asked, okay, explain, what does St. Paul mean in this verse? And then the first son says, oh, he means going up to the mountain is like ascending toward God, and you should praise the kingdom of heaven, and so on. And then he's like, good, okay, interesting. What about you? And then the other one says, well, actually, it's about moving away from temptation, and we should be careful in our everyday life and not stray on a path. He says, interesting. He goes to the next one and says, well, what do you think? That person says, I don't know. And then he said, that's right.
Ha ha ha. That is beautiful, yeah. Yeah. Well, you're right, Curt. This is really quite equivalent to the story that I've just told you from one of the Upanishads.
So this is where science is, and this is where science has actually told science that it needs to stop now, right? Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, it ends particle physics. It should, but in our delusion, we don't understand the message, and we just keep going, right? So even Wolfgang gives these analogies and these metaphors and these stories, but he doesn't do it. He doesn't engage in the instruction. And this is the biggest problem, is that people listen to thoughts in order to be entertained and not informed. They're using it as a relative form of existence. They just like thinking because they know they exist when they are thinking. But the message is you need to engage in the practice. That's what the teaching is, but they keep resorting back to engaging in the teaching because they are actually trapped. Maya has them, and they just can't fucking stop thinking, basically. Because they're just having too much fun.
Much in common between Christianity and the Vedic tradition. Vedic tradition is the oldest in the world, and so old that you can't, I think it's really difficult to date it, but it was centuries before Abraham was born. So this is the oldest wisdom in the world, and it is a tremendous wisdom. But what amazed me in my later life when I began to think about Christianity and the Vedic tradition is that actually what Christ brought into the world is brand new, and not a trace of it is to be found in the Vedas. And I was very surprised because earlier in life I felt this was a complete revelation. If you want to find anything in the domain of wisdom, well, you'll find it there. Not true. I mean, for example, the story of Adam and the fall of Adam, which is, of course, basic to Christianity. Christ is the second Adam, if you will. You find not a trace of this in any of the Vedas. I didn't.
But wouldn't Christ be Atman? Wouldn't Christ be an expression of Atman?
Recognize this until very, very late in life, and I was amazed.
Brahman Atman is the same relationship as Christ saying, I and the Father are one. So I think he's missing something here.
Incidentally, it was last year that I finally wrote a book trying to put the Vedic and the Christian religion in perspective and to, as it were, indicate what they have in common and what is brand new in Christianity. And so I published this book under the title Vedanta in Light of Christian Wisdom. And I say almost the opposite of what is nowadays, so to speak, trendy, because, yes, Schuon had this notion of the transcendent unity of religions, and the idea that different religions are different paths up to the same mountain peak. This is absolutely wrong.
No, it's not wrong. Why would you say it's wrong? The final step is the same, though. It all leads to the transcendence of the voice in your head. In that way, the top of the mountain is the same for every philosophical endeavor, every endeavor that includes a system of thought, a specific system of thought. When that thought system concludes or comes to the answer that it's looking for,
I'm convinced of it, and this is what is the main thesis that I present in this book. And in fact, I show that the eschaton, the Vedic eschaton, what I call the nirvanic option, is in a way the diametric opposite of the Christian eschaton. And the point is really very easy to understand, from a formal point of view. And that is that both the Vedic religion and the Christian religion are ways to God. The eschaton is always a union with God, if you will, a seeing of
a
God.
remembering that you are God.
But there are two kinds, and they are completely different. The Vedic seeing, let me back up. I want to first of all quote Saint John. No man has ever seen God.
God is that which sees. God
This
is the
basic,
seeing.
and this is the first thing one needs to understand. So then, how can there be a religion if no man has seen God? And the purpose of religion is to see God. Isn't there a contradiction?
Why would you say, I think you pulled another thing out of your bum, is why would you say that the purpose of religion is to see God? Well, that would make religion incorrect. So yeah, I agree that religion maybe does have that idea. But fundamentally, it's about being God. It's seeing that you are God.
And the point is...
So if there's the absolute, it can't see itself, only if it wants to, if you will. When it sees itself, that's the world. And when it just is, there's no world.
Is that the idea of religion is very subtle. There are basically, as it turns out, two ways of seeing God. Only two ways. There is a direct way, which is a way of self-annihilation.
Ego annihilation. You can't destroy the self.
Always to see God, you must do a sacrifice. You must
Which is
offer
the
something
ego.
to the flame.
That's different than suicide.
Different, yes.
Please explain the difference just to get it clear to people before you move forward.
Well, if a man commits suicide, it is not in order to see God. The motive of suicide is things are so bad I can't cope with them anymore, or what.
They want to conclude the game. And the option is here to conclude the game, but that's not one of them. That's not one of the options. So it'll just spit you out sideways, basically. You just take a giant step sideways and start off with all the same karma that you didn't deal with.
Or just craziness. No, religion is a matter of man offering sacrifice for the purpose of seeing God. And there are basically two ways. I mean, you can see on logical grounds that there can only be two ways.
There can only be one
Now,
way.
the Vedic is the direct path.
How could there be two ways?
And so the only way,
So he said before that he's agreeing that there are two paths leading to the same place, which he said didn't exist earlier.
you can attain the vision of Brahman is
To sacrifice the world.
to
Yeah.
sacrifice your
To let it go.
humanity. And this is why the sadhus in India wear a Gerua robe. India is a land that burns its dead. And so the Gerua color, the color is the color of flame. So what the Gerua robe of the sadhu means is that he has really offered his life, offered himself to the flames as a sacrifice for the vision of God.
Okay, well, what does he do? What does the sadhu do to transmit this? It's just transcending thought. That's what they're doing. They're sitting there in the thought-free state. That's what they're doing. It's not some sort of, again, esoteric, really special things that they're reciting in their heads or anything. No, it's completely accessible to everyone. It's just simply abiding in the space between thoughts.
And having lived with these sadhus, I spent 7 months living with them.
Yeah, but not
This was
practicing
decisive
with them.
in my life.
He keeps saying that how he witnessed them and he lived with them, but he didn't engage in the practice himself. And this is what's made all the difference. This is why he's so close and yet so far.
It just gave me a little glimpse.
There's so many loose
of the higher
ends.
truth.
He's got the texture, the fabric, the rug or whatever it is, but there's so many loose ends. It's not very well put together. You just start pulling and it falls apart. But the garment or whatever that he's weaving is accurate, but it just is lacking the glue, which is his direct experience of transcending thought, which is what the sadhus were doing.
And so, this is the Vedic eschaton. I call it the nirvanic option. Now, nirvana is the Buddhist word. It means blowing out like a candle flame. And I use it because, to me, it is the most descriptive way, the most perhaps perfect way of explaining the eschaton of the Vedic tradition. It is a blowing out.
It's the ending of
And
the
therefore
illusion,
we cannot conceive
the
of
cycle of
it. If
samsara,
you
which
ask
is all
any
experience.
wise man, what is the end state? How does the perfect yogi who has reached the end of the Vedic path successfully, what happens to him? It is a question that absolutely cannot be answered. Simply because there are no words for it. I mean, if Sri Ramakrishna would put it this way, he would say, if you've never tasted a mango, you never will know what it means to taste a mango. There are no words that can describe it. So this is the Vedic eschaton. It's a nirvanic, and incidentally, I've seen in India people very, very close to that state. And all I can say is, even looking at these people experiencing their ambience, you realize what a tremendous thing it is. And I think one of the reasons that I benefited from these associations is because instinctively I approached them with folded hands. And this is why I received, because all I could give them is my admiration,
But they're not special beings. They're
reverence.
just people.
And that was enough. No real sadhu in the Vedic tradition will not generously give to anyone who approaches him like that. So it's a wonderful thing. If we had time together, unfortunately we don't. Could tell you some very interesting things.
Well, next time.
God willing,
Come here,
yes.
Wolfgang.
So this
We'll
was
chat.
the Vedic
It's a nice
eschaton.
place. You'll like
Now,
it
the
here.
Christian eschaton is the diametric opposite, and the fact is this: when Christ was born,
So it's not really the opposite. It's just that Christianity is so materialistically based, is that heaven, their idea of the highest state, is a place, right? It's just a physical location where everything's perfect. So that's where it's incorrect. It's actually not a place. It's outside of space and time. It's basically being completely self-aware in as dreamless sleep. That's the closest that we come to experiencing this state.
with a long, long time after the
So
Vedic,
heaven is not a place. I mean, we had a place called Earth that was pretty freaking amazing. And we had basically all of our basic needs are being cared for. And it wasn't enough because everything here is unsubstantial, and every experience will be also unsubstantial.
religion was already
Like we
well
already lived
established.
in heaven,
He brought
and it was
into
lacking.
the world
We measured heaven, and it was lacking.
ideas and realities which were entirely new, had never been conceived of before. And so the first thing he brought into the world is the doctrine of the Holy Trinity.
This is important
Three persons
stuff
in one,
now for
a
discussion.
Godhead. And there is no trace of that in India.
Okay, so here's my theory about the triune system and the Brahman and Atman system. I believe that Atman isn't splitting the positive and the negative. It's containing both the positive and the negative as the relative form of existence, or I am such and such. So Atman is the positive and the negative in one representative. It is represented in one symbol. So they just don't break up. It's like the Tao, except they have the Tao as the Atman, and the Atman, you can't even, it's that. You can't put a name to it, but they keep putting names to it, right? So it doesn't matter. It's almost like they're playing a game of Turtles All the Way, where you just name it a different name. But the main expression is that there's the reality, and then there's the mirror image of that reality, and one is dependent on the other, and the other is not dependent on the other.
The Vedas, the Upanishads have nothing to say about God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost.
Yeah, so God the Father would be Brahman, and God, the dualistic part of God, that is the Holy Ghost and the Son, the Holy Ghost and the Son are brought together in one symbol, and that is Atman.
So this Trinitarian conception of God, which of course all of Christianity rests upon that, is nowhere to be found in the Vedas, number one. Secondly, Christ revealed the mystery of the incarnation. So the Trinitarian conception of God tells mankind that there is a Son of God, and
Physical
it
aspect.
is based upon this principle that our Lord was able to reveal the second principle, that this Son of God could become man. And so you have the
God
virgin
is
birth and
the Son of God as man.
the mystery of the incarnation, God become man. And then you have, of course, the mystery of the mission of Christ, the suffering, the crucifixion, the 3 days in the tomb, and the resurrection. And now, it is at this point that a new religion was brought into the world, because, and here's the idea of the Christian eschaton, which, as I say, is the diametric opposite of the Vedic. The point is, we can attain a union with the incarnate God, because the incarnate God is human. He is a man. And so
Not a
there
man.
is a possibility
All of humanity.
entering into the mystical body of Christ. And this
We
is
have.
what it means to be a Christian. And you enter through baptism and through faith. And then
So you do this hokey pokey routine, and then you're in. Like, that's just ridiculous.
because you are a member of the mystical body of Christ,
So you have a secret handshake.
there is a possibility.
You have a secret handshake, and you do some spiritual hokey pokey routine, and then you're in the group. Wow, that's awesome. And then what do? Do you keep doing the hokey pokey routines, or like, is it all fixed now? And now why aren't you immediately in heaven when this occurs? Right, when you accept Christ into your heart and become a born again Christian, or whatever he's talking about, or do the hokey pokey routines, why aren't you immediately just teleported into heaven? Why are things still shitty and you're the same as everyone else, even the atheists? The atheists and the Christians that do all this, they have the exact same lives, the same anxieties, the same problems, the same joys, the same sorrows. It's all the same.
Of seeing God through Christ. And there's a passage in what we call the high priestly prayer,
There's no one to save you.
where our Lord explains this very idea very precisely. He's speaking to God the Father, and he says, quote, "This is life eternal, to know thee, the one true God, and Jesus Christ who was sent." Here you have a perfect, accurate, and complete description of of the Christian eschaton.
There's no need for all this esotericism. It's like you're trying to be witty or clever about it. If you're trying to be clever about it, why? Just say it. Just say it as succinctly and bluntly as you can. If you're being quaint about it, it kind of is showing that you don't actually know.
Antipodal to the Vedic. We do not need to burn our human identity.
Yeah, we need to sacrifice it.
No, as a human being, we can see God the Father through Jesus Christ. And so Christ brought into the world a new eschaton, a new way of seeing God, a way in which our humanity is not burnt out. So it took me half a lifetime to gain whatever clarity I have on this subject, and I was tremendously relieved when it occurred to me, when I finally discovered that the Christian eschaton is not the Vedic. Schuon was absolutely wrong. I don't want to talk about any other religions. The two religions that deeply interest me is the Vedic and the Christian. And I realized that I have no doubt about. These are antipodal eschata. The only life eternal that is possible is a, quote, seeing of God. There's no other eternity that is.
So you just sit there looking at God. That's it. You just sit there looking at God, living vicariously through it. No, the only way to be eternally unified with God is to be God. You're not thinking this through, Wolfgang.
Remotely possible. But the point is, there are two ways of, quote, seeing God.
There's one way of
The
seeing
direct
God
way,
and one way of
which is
being
the
God,
Vedic,
and they're not the same way.
It's a bona fide way. I mean, the perfection of the Vedic.
So which way is it? Which is the correct way? Which is the correct way?
Path is rare, but I think in India there has hardly been a generation without such events occurring. So it's a real thing, and it's still going on even today, I'm sure.
Not just in India.
But
it doesn't have to be in
with the
India.
birth of Christ, or more accurately, if you will, with his resurrection, a new religion came into the world, and this is Christianity. It offers us a life eternal as human beings.
Well, what good is that?
Humanity becomes, in a certain sense, deified through.
So, eternal life as a human. Well, that would fucking suck.
Union with
Why would anyone want that? I want more of this.
Body. So, this is all I know about religion. This is, and as I said, I wrote this last book about this subject. The main purpose was to combat this perennialist philosophy, which has, I think it's correct to say that as things stand now, the most intellectual people all over the world are perennialists. If you talk to people of high intellectual achievement, and supposing that they have been interested in the subject of religion, you will find in all likelihood that they are perennialists, that they believe in the so-called transcendent unity of religions, which is a completely heretical notion.
So they're all wrong, or they're all talking about different things? It doesn't make sense. So which one's right? You just confused the fuck out of me, and probably everyone else. So which one's right? If they're diametrically opposed, if the Vedic tradition is the oldest one, and you've gone on about how perfect it is, and it's completely in opposite to the Christian one, and you're a Christian, then what's going on? What are you doing? Like, what are you following? What is the practice? What do you do? What is the doing of your theology?
Why do you call the aviternal instead of eternal?
Well, because the idea of the tripartite cosmos, in which
See, this is where he gets something incredibly right, is the triune. He recognized the importance of the Trinity.
the highest level is beyond space and time. This is the crux of the matter.
Yeah, this is juicy stuff.
Well, this is a kind of eternity, but it needs to be
Potential.
distinguished from the eternity of religion.
Right, so timelessness isn't eternal, it's timeless. Timelessness or potential is infinite, but
The eternity
yeah, so the eternal is timeless.
of for example, the eternity which the Christian speaks of when he
Right. So if you're in a place, there has to be time, right? If there's some space, there has to be some time there. Because if there's people, humans wandering around doing things, well, that requires time, right? So it's just the same thing, only perfect. Well, it doesn't work that way. So if you include time in the equation of heaven, well, then you're always going to end up with boredom eventually. You're always going to end up, well, right, so it has to exclude time and space.
says that God is eternal, heaven is eternal. So eternity in that sense is more than the eternity, because actually
How could there be anything higher than the thing that you're saying is the highest thing? It just, oh.
one of the
How did people not just
ways
rip
in
this
which
apart?
Christianity differs from the Vedic teaching is that the
Out of
Vedic
respect, I
teaching
guess.
regards the cosmos
This is good,
as
though.
cyclic.
Yes.
It goes on and on like a sine curve that has no beginning
Like a
and no
wheel
end.
of samsara,
And
like a going
the
around a clock, the hands
Christian
going around a clock,
cosmology
is different because
is
it's linear.
radically different
This is where the number
because
system
it is
comes
integral
from.
to the Christian tradition that
So this is the infinity of the cycle, a cyclical process being expressed in a linear way. That's what the number system is. And that's the duality that Christianity adheres to. So for the Christian idea of heaven is that it's a place and you last eternally in this perfect place. It's completely a fantasy.
at the second coming of Christ, which no man knows the day and the hour.
It's getting close though.
The cosmos in its
Wow.
entirety.
Yeah. I believe the second coming of Christ is non-conceptuality. So it's already here, but surprise, surprise, going unrecognized. Surprise.
Will be destroyed.
Surprise.
So the difference between the Vedic outlook and the Christian is that in the Vedic outlook, the cosmos has no end in both senses.
But it's not the cosmos is illusory, and it's outside of the reality, just like a mirror image is outside of that which it is imaging.
The sense
Imagining.
of a purpose and end in the sense of a termination. So in the Vedic way of looking at the cosmos, there's neither a purpose, because the only answer a Vedic guru could give to the question, what is the purpose of the cosmos, there is none. The Vedic spiritual practice tries essentially to get out of this cosmos because
Well, then that's the goal. That's the purpose. He doesn't want to recognize it. But obviously, that's the purpose, is to transcend this. It's the purpose of all of this, is to transcend it, just like the purpose of a labyrinth is to enjoy it, be engaged, and then depart from it.
the Vedic wisdom says this is not God, this is not reality.
Yes.
The purpose of life is
Okay, so
gain union.
there you go. You just contradicted yourself again.
God.
There's the purpose
So
of
you
the
see,
cosmos.
in this Vedic philosophy,
You snorted.
the cosmos plays no role.
Well,
The
the cosmos
has
is
no
the role.
purpose.
You just... In and of itself, it has no purpose. Its purpose is for God's entertainment.
And also, ipso facto, if you will, it has no ending either. In the Vedic tradition, the cosmos is without beginning and without end. And finally, the Vedic masters will tell you that in fact it's unreal. Why, when you see a snake in the rope, how can you, why should you ask, where does this snake come from? Why is it there? And so forth. Save yourself the trouble and realize that there is no snake. This is the Vedic approach. It's quite different from the Christian. The Christian says, yes, the cosmos has its reality. It was put there by God, and it was put there for a purpose. It's like a school.
Yeah, there's no contradiction there. It's like a school from which you graduate, and the Vedics are trying to escape this. So it's a different analogy for the same state. It's so obvious.
A school is there to teach the students, and once that is done, the school has no more purpose.
Which is
if
all
there
of
were
this.
only one student
Yes.
in the world and one school, as soon as this student graduates, you don't need the school anymore. So, therefore, in the Christian religion, the cosmos itself will come to an end. It'll end when it has fulfilled its purpose. And all of this, you see, is radically different from the Vedic way of looking at things.
I have a question now from Matt Seagull, who you spoke to on his channel called Footnotes to Plato.
Oh yes, he is process theology, the Whitehead scholar.
Right, so this question is in line with that thinking. If God does not evolve or change in any relation to actual history or the world, then how are we to understand said history, including our own lives, as anything other than an illusory falling away from and forgetting of what is real?
You can't. That's what's happened. We've forgotten what's real. By design, because we're acting in this theater.
Well, I think the premise of what Matt Siegel is saying here is something that is more in line with the Vedic than with the Christian way of thinking. So I think, in essence, I have answered this very question precisely by what I said just now, when in explaining the difference between the Vedic way of looking at the cosmos and the Christian. I think that does answer the question. From the Vedic point of view, the question is absolutely justified. The Christian point of view is different.
Some atheists will say, hey, this is real, so we see this, but regardless, we have a world that exists, a world that is real. And then they ask, well, is God real? And it sounds like from what you were saying earlier, we have it backward. God is way more real.
Absolutely, that is the whole point. God is more than real as we understand and are capable of understanding reality. This is why religion, true religion, is simply above what we nowadays call philosophy or what we nowadays call science.
Because true religion is pointing to the transcendence of thought. If there's no voice in your head, where is science? Where is philosophy? Where is even religion? When there's no voice in your head. So to me, religion is the only system of thought that leads a person to the transcendence of thought. That's what makes religion special, is that it uses thought, at least the fundamental aspects of religion, like the early ones, like Vedanta and stuff. It uses thought as the finger to point to the transcendence of thought. But philosophy does not do this. Mathematics does not do this. Physics does not do this, right? That's why they are never ending and will never conclude. And yeah, are tools of Maya.
If we cannot go beyond that level, we don't really know what religion is all about. And whatever we think it is and whatever we call it in our conversation, it is all like smoke. It isn't there. Goethe, Schall und Rauch. Sound and smoke.
Okay, so
this is why most, so to speak, discussion or arguments about religion are completely pointless and lead nowhere, because even to talk about religion sensibly, one needs to, in a sense, avail oneself of the tradition.
So this is the trap that is fallen into, is that he speaks the speak, he talks the talk, but he doesn't walk it. He says, he expresses that, well, maybe we could just be silent and there's no way to express this, and he expresses it many, many, many times over. And instead of both of them just sitting in silence and engaging in the answer, experiencing directly the answer, what do they keep doing? So Maya has us, even when we know or we think we know what to do, we just don't do it. It's just, so this is where non-conceptuality is. It stresses the importance of the practice. That's all it is, and this is why hardly anyone wants to engage in it, because it's tough. It's difficult. Truth is not easy to realize.
If there were no Vedas and there were no Gospel, Old and New Testament, there would be no religion, and the word would mean nothing, and whatever people talk would be just talk. So, in a sense,
So if you don't do the practice, then all of your talk, Wolfgang, is just talk. And all of your followers, they just talk too. Don't they?
might say that you need to believe in order to believe. It sounds paradoxical, and incidentally, Christ himself has said as much when he said, "He who has, to him shall be given, and he who has not, from him shall be taken away, I think, the little that he has. But he who has, to him shall be given." In other words, on the level of the ordinary atheist, such as you find wherever you look almost in our civilization, these people can neither affirm religion or deny it. The point is, the idea of religion is something that is not in them. So it doesn't
Kali
matter
Yuga.
whether they say, "I believe this" or "I don't believe this," because it's just talk. It's just talk. He who has, to him shall be given, which means that in a certain sense, there must be a religious spark in us. If there is not, we cannot enter there. So of course, this raises a problem, obviously. Where does this religious spark come from? Do some people have it, other people not? If they don't have it, they're not responsible for not being religious and so on. You can go speak about this and think about it from now to eternity. It's just sounded. He who has, to him shall be given. And since it's a mystery, we cannot understand why does it happen that some have and some obviously do not. I don't know. This is, God knows, this is not anything that I, based upon the worldly understanding that I may have, I have a PhD in this and that, okay, but that's beyond all that. This is why the Christian needs to follow the words of Christ almost blindly. We can't understand it. We can't justify it.
No, man, you gotta understand all of it. You can't just go, oh well, I'm just gonna leave it up to faith now. Now, if you can understand it to a degree where you let go of it, right? So you can't just keep going on thinking that someday I'll understand all of it. You have to understand where it's wrong and drop it.
But our situation is this: we're like somebody swimming in the middle of an ocean, sharks all around. We don't know when one of them is going to come and swallow us up. And someone comes and throws you a rope and says, "Come aboard. You will be healed and warmed and fed and taken to your home." And you say, "Well, that sounds very well, but where do you come from? Where's the boat? Where are you going to take us?" Well, chances are good the sharks are going to eat you up. before you ever get half through this.
So that means that you have to engage in the practice. The practice is grabbing the rope. The practice is grabbing the rope.
That sounds like the parable of the poison arrow of Buddha.
Oh, yeah. Right. I had forgotten about that, yeah. So this is really our situation. And it's a mystery. I mean, look at all the people, millions and millions of people. And actually, in today's Western world, only a minority, A, believe in God, B, want to follow God, and 3, do follow God to a certain degree. Only a handful. It's so strange. So this is another question. I don't know the answer to that. And
Kali
I
Yuga.
only know one thing. That's not my business. My business is to follow Christ as well as I am able, based upon his teaching and with the help of his authentic church. That's all I need to do. That's all I can understand.
Will God always catch us when we fall?
That's a very difficult question, because if you answer yes,
So this is the situation, is that God knows eventually that this will end, that it will never be forever lost. So God knows that the inevitability of the conclusion of samsara, but it just doesn't know when.
It sounds like nihilism, because it doesn't matter what you do, you'll be saved. So
yeah, you can't, as a Christian, you cannot say yes, because we know that damnation is a real thing. In other words, religion, true religion, is not without risk.
have you heard this phrase, hell is a door locked from the inside? It means that at any point you have the opportunity to get out.
I cannot affirm that. I cannot.
I just affirmed it.
Affirmed or denied. I don't see anywhere in Scripture that Christ has given us an instruction based upon which this can be affirmed. And if you take seriously what the saints have had to say, I think you can find instances where testimony has been given contrary to this position. It would be very nice, but you know, the path to God is not without danger.
Only to the ego.
We're talking about realities here, not pipe dreams. And so it's like climbing a mountain. Yes, you may reach the summit, but even within a few feet of the summit, you can lose your footing and fall to your death. There is risk. It's real.
Do you believe in free will?
Oh, definitely. If there were no free will, there could be no religion.
It's even worse than that. There isn't even an individually existing separate entity capable of making decisions. The appearance of choices and choosing one over the other projects the illusion of a separately existing entity.
religion. In other words, to attain union with God, to attain salvation, to enter the kingdom of heaven, there is not only a cost, there is a risk.
The cost is
God
the end of the world.
has a power to give us all things, but there is one thing that he cannot simply give us. I needn't tell you what that is. He cannot give us salvation just, here it is, my child. No. This is the one and only thing that God cannot do. And incidentally, I forget who it was.
But it's all you. It's all God. So fundamentally, it's always God doing everything. Everything that can be done. Everything that can be described as a doing. Well, it's God doing it, because God is the only being. You said yourself that God is the only being. So if there's salvation occurring, it's occurring within the framework of God.
Well, some great Christian saint made this point. I didn't invent that. Oh, I remember where I read this. There's a wonderful book written by an Eastern Orthodox priest, Losky. The last name of his was Losky, and his books are beautiful. I've read them with great benefit. And somewhere he explains that there is one thing and one thing only that God cannot do. It takes one will, this is what he says, and I thought it was beautiful. He says, it takes one will to create, but it takes two wills to give salvation. This is the whole thing. The one thing God cannot do, he cannot simply give one of his creatures salvation. Because salvation is so great that you have to will it to.
How does free will comport with knowing that there's a timeless realm, so that you can see all of what occurs through time, but then if we exist as a moment in time and we're trying to plan something for the future and we have free will, how do we have free will when from another perspective all our choices have been made or all of it can be seen?
Because we don't have free will, and there's no individuals.
One answer to that question, and that is that free will pertains to our present state,
Which is a state of
which
ignorance.
is a state of half knowing.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Once we attain enlightenment, there's no question of free will. You know,
Sorry, enlightenment is the same as salvation, or is that different?
It's the same thing.
well, I think nothing short of salvation would put you into that state where there's no more free will. There's no more free will because there's no more will in our sense of the term.
There's no more individual. There's no
Love
more.
is what makes things real. What do you make of that quote?
Well,
Love.
I think it is based upon one of the deepest teachings of Christ. St. John the Evangelist in his parable from God.
What's your disagreement with the Gnostics?
I don't care about the Gnostics.
Well, I said that an integral part of Gnosticism is the idea of which manifests as non-locality. And in fact, the last Nobel Prize of Physics, the 2022 Nobel Prize of Physics, as you know, was awarded to 3 physicists who conducted crucial experiments, I think in the 80s, to determine which of the 2 physical theories is right.
But one
Quantum
isn't the
theory
physical theory.
or
See, quantum theory isn't a physical theory at all.
relativity. The recognition, which has been made long ago, but people are very reluctant to own up to it. The recognition is that relativity theory and quantum theory cannot both be true.
But they are, because they are describing, they are expressions of the two different realms, the two appearances of dualism.
And
So there is at the most fundamental level of description, there has to be two. There has to be two if there's going to be a manifestation or a description. So this is where that dividing line is, and we can't erase that dividing line. It's like trying to make the positive connect with the negative, or the opposite. It's trying to make a magnet out of both positives. Like, it doesn't make sense. The reality is singular, and there's two aspects, and they're running parallel to each other. So they're describing, it's the same process, is the same fundamental creative process of the awareness coming back onto itself, creates in parallel these two realms, these two aspects of the appearance, and they run in parallel, and the way and where they join is in spirit. So, and trying to cram them together into a unified thinking that they're expressing the same reality is incorrect. Thought realm and the physical realm are separate. They are the most fundamental, separately existing dualities that bring rise to all of this.
it was
So
an experiment.
they're expressing two different realms. And those two different realms will never coexist. They coexist in the singularity, but you can't dispel two illusions by working with the illusions. You have to transcend the illusions and get to the state prior to them being projected.
To determine which of the two.
So the TOE that they are looking for, the physical TOE that's going to try to bring quantum mechanics, which is describing the mind thought realm, the non-physical realm, and gravity, which is expressing the physical realm of the senses. That attempt will actually create a new hybrid realm that'll be, well, more negative, because this is the positive side. So that they're going to just keep going on and trying to find unity by using the process that created the duality in the first place to try to create unity. It's obviously going to end up in a big bang. Big
True
bang.
was in fact conceived by Einstein himself, and it hinges upon what is nowadays called Bell's inequality. And in the 80s, I think it was, 3 experimenters did the experiment, and the results clearly and definitively stand on the side of quantum theory. And to me, it is a rather interesting phenomenon.
So they're saying that quantum theory is it's more accurate. That's why they're saying that it's probably better describing the reality, but it's only because we're shifting into the yang bias. I'm sorry, the yin bias, which is mind, which is expressed by the wave function and mathematics. So mathematics is a completely thought-based realm, which is equated or related more to the yin side.
As I would say, it's a sociological phenomenon that, logically speaking, these experiments, based upon an idea going back to Einstein himself, of course, Einstein proposed that experiment because he thought it would vindicate relativity versus quantum theory. Einstein was...
So in the process that's going on here, like the screen, right? The image on the screen, which is physical, two-dimensional, but it's still in the physical realm, it's two-dimensional. But the process is that there's a screen with a bunch of pixels, which is, like, again, basically the analogous to the physical realm. And then there's the wave information that's hitting the back of the screen that's instructing the pixels how to turn a flash on and off in a given sequence to give the appearance of what's going on in the screen. So that's what's happening, and the processes that run the software are different than the processes that run the hardware. The hardware and the software can't ever be joined into one entity, can it? Well, there's a distinction there between the hardware and the software of what's going on. And there's no getting around that.
Very critical of quantum theory, he spoke ironically of what he called spukhafte Fernwirkung, spooky action at a distance, which he never accepted because actually it contradicts relativity theory. And lo and behold, these experiments, the chief name involved in these experiments is the Frenchman Alain yeah. Anyhow, the experiments clearly, unequivocally came out on the side of quantum theory versus relativity. And to me it is so interesting. There is a kind of mystery about Einstein and the Steinian physics. He's almost like a god, and
Ave eternal is a subset of eternal or distinct from?
Is distinct from, because the point is this: what eternity and eternity are not the same thing. And the distinction goes back to St. Thomas Aquinas. I don't know of anyone else who's made that distinction. But the distinction is this, that Ave eternity pertains to the cosmos. It is the highest of three.
Well, what does that even mean, the cosmos? Like, that's not the right word to use, because when I think of the cosmos, I think of space, I think of the universe. So when he says the cosmos, I think of the physical realm, the physical world, which really may or may not include the thought realm. So I think when he says the cosmos, I think he means reality, like all of it, the all. When he says cosmos, I think he means all.
The ontological strata, characterized by the fact that it is subject neither to space nor to time. And what is the difference between Ave eternity and eternity? Well, let me point out that according to Christianity, the cosmos itself will cease at the second coming of Christ. It is there for a purpose, and when that purpose in God's time is achieved.
So when he says the cosmos, in my model, that is body mind, the dualities, the physical, the thought realm.
The cosmos will be normal. This is what Christianity calls the parousia, the second coming of Christ.
Right, and if you're not prepared and if you don't recognize that you are the divine when this happens, then you will continue on with the next iteration.
And if eternity and eternity were the same, then when the cosmos disappears, God and all else would disappear too.
Now, what about dreamless sleep? The world disappears from the first person perspective, which is the only one that you have. The only one that's ever existed is first person perspective. From that perspective, the world and time go away with the normal circadian rhythm. So now it's impossible for the world, let's say that the world and time and all the senses didn't exist, and also you didn't exist. Well, that doesn't seem possible. So in dreamless sleep, there is still self, but there's no time and no space and no experience, no world, no thoughts, no senses, no thoughts. And this is what he's getting at here.
And this is why eternity and eternity are not the same thing.
Yeah, so the eternity is timelessness, which is the absolute, which requires nothing relative to it. And the eternity is that which manifests from that goes on infinitely in time and limitation.
Still don't understand. So eternity means timelessness
No.
or infinite temporal duration? Which one? Is it eternity
Timeless.
means you exist forever, or it means you're distinct from time?
Eternity, the adjective.
I don't know what he's going to say, but yes, the aveternal, which is enlightenment, which is liberation and nirvana, is timelessness. There's no time. It's not you're existing in space and time forever in some sort of heavenly realm. It's basically dreamless sleep, if you will.
Adjective eternal can apply to any reality which is not subject to time. But eternity, I hope I didn't misspeak. What I wanted to say is that eternity applies to any state not subject to time.
Nor space.
But yes, no space either. And the reason that eternity...
So the time aspect would be in the thought realm, right? And the space aspect would be the physical realm. So time is more of a function of thought, and space is more of a function of senses.
Eternity is not the same as eternity is because, according to Christianity, the universe, the world, the creation itself will cease at the second coming of Christ. This is a mystery.
Okay, but this is the linear expression, right? Because Christianity is basically materialist, and its science is its go-to, or mathematics. So from the Christian point of view, it ends, but then there's heaven beyond that, right? So it doesn't really end. There's just another place. See, this is where it's contradicting itself again, because he says that all of this will end upon the second coming of Christ, but then don't we all just get teleported into heaven? isn't that just kind of like this again? So it understands intuitively that it's actually cyclical. So in this respect, the Eastern thought of samsara, the wheel of samsara, and having it cyclical, it's just that this cycle is so huge, we've come back full circle, and it's so immense that it's the conclusion of senses, of many of the senses. I would say that smell's gone, taste is gone, right? Like, just keeping it practical, how this affects actually a person's experience.
History, or what Christianity calls the parousia. And incidentally, as you can imagine, this is a tough nut for the contemporary theologian influenced by our contemporary science, because science cannot conceive of such a thing and implicitly denies the parousia. But the teaching of the parousia is integral to the teaching of Christianity. Our Lord speaks of it very explicitly, and he says that this parousia will come, but he says that the day and the time is known only to my Father.
I don't think even
So
the Father knows. Well, maybe from the eternal perspective. Well, anyway.
History. We have no idea when this parousia will
Yeah,
come.
so that's the program. That's the algorithm, is that God knows fundamentally and essentially and ultimately what is going to occur in the big scheme of things, but it doesn't know when. And that's time. This is the introduction of time and limitation.
But we have it on the authority of Christ himself and the church that it will come. So this is the fundamental difference of outlook between the Vedic cosmology and the Christian.
No, there's no difference
The
there.
Vedic cosmology regards the cosmos as perfectly...
So the Vedic is eternal?
No, it is not. In fact, the Vedic has no concept of eternity because it does not distinguish between the eternity of its cycles, its
It's too.
manifestation.
You can't mix the timeless with the time-based.
But they alternate going back to infinity and forward.
It depends upon which perspective you're taking. If you're taking the relative perspective and describing the situation from there, yes, it goes on linearly both ways. And if you look from the higher perspective, it's actually cyclical. And then when you look from the higher perspective, you don't really see anything at all.
Into an infinite future. So the Vedic cosmology is totally cyclic. You can think of it as a sine curve which goes to negative infinity and to positive infinity. So there is an eternal recurrence of manifestation and non-manifestation. Non-manifestation, I think they call pralaya. So this is the Vedic cosmology, and the Christian cosmology differs radically, because the essential point of the Christian cosmology is that time itself will cease.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. You ask any Christian about heaven, and they'll describe this only a perfect state of this. Every single one will. So there's time involved in Christianity,
cosmos will cease.
How can you say the cosmos will cease when there's heaven? Like it, and heaven is just a this way better. Like
Cosmos is there only for a certain stretch of time. It came into being and it will cease to exist when Christ will fully manifest himself at his second coming. And you know, it makes tremendous amount of sense. If you think about it long enough, you realize that from a Christian point of vantage, it cannot be otherwise. Because when Christ manifests himself in the fullness of his divinity, it's like turning on an infinite light and the darkness will cease.
so it points out what has been incorrect the whole time. Second coming of Christ, or let's say Kali, the destroyer of illusion, reveals all that has been taken to be true that's actually been false. And that's what non-conceptuality does. The second coming of Christ isn't a person. No one would believe
The
a
polarity
person
of day and night and all these
in
things
this
will
era.
cease. When Christ manifests himself in his full divinity, it's like an atom bomb.
That's what you think. But if it's not recognized, then it doesn't switch the consciousness, does it? If it's unrecognized.
All these little things that we know now will disappear.
Not automatically. You have to be open.
And incidentally, in the modern Catholic world, top theologians parted company with orthodoxy over this issue because they are very scientific in their outlook. They have more faith in our scientists, evidently, than in God himself. And so the idea of the parousia is something they could not accept. There's a famous Catholic theologian, I forget his name, it's just as well because he was a heretic. He did not accept the idea of the parousia, and he had the incredible, I don't know, call it chutzpah, to regard that Christ himself was mistaken in certain of his teachings, namely the teachings which deny the eternity of the world, the parousia. So I think the popes at the time were absolutely culpable for not excommunicating. Hans Küng was the name of this work of terms, and you're not a Christian by any stretch of the imagination if you do not fully the cosmos is tripartite, which doesn't mean that there are three. When I speak of three levels, this is just a way of communicating something that cannot be communicated in any other way. The point is that the three levels of the cosmos constitute one irreducible wholeness.
Okay, so this is why his model, he can't use the words, his model isn't quite sufficient to describe this one irreducible wholeness that he's attempting to describe. So intuitively he gets it, but he just doesn't see that his model isn't a state of superposition like my fundamental triune model of reality is. It's what hasn't been recognized by everyone is that this tripartite thing, this trinity, is the state of superposition. So you have a nameless the nameless reality, the Tao, God, zero, potential, right? And then you have the way in which it expresses itself, and that is through the duality. But the duality isn't, it's like curve, right? So there's a curve, and the convex is relating to the curve, and the concave is relating to the curve. When you read the definition of concave, it says nothing, it doesn't refer to convex at all. It refers to the curve, it describes the curve. And when you do the opposite of concave, whatever, the opposite one, concave doesn't refer to convex in its description, and convex doesn't refer to concave in its description or its existence. They're both relating to curve. So they're other ofs, right? They're not other thans. Nothing is other than thing. It's no thing, right? So
in its
threefold nature. So how can there be three things as one thing, right? It's because it has to include itself like a Mobius strip or that Klein bottle thing, right? It has to include itself. So three things as one thing is the state of superposition. But the third thing, the reality, is unnameable, undescribable. It's the way it's described is through the dualities. So you can't further. This is where it all ends, right? This is the last turtle, right? So this is where the turtles end. It ends in the potential, the nameless potential that is the absolute.
nature. And this is really easy to understand because man, you and I and every human being is also tripartite in exactly the same sense. We too are made of three levels. In the traditional terminology, this is corpus, anima, spiritus. And clearly spiritus is the same as the
Eviternal.
Eviternal realm. Spiritus is beyond.
Yes, yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. This is my fundamental model of reality. That's it. It's not linear like his does. Like it just is the correct manner in which to express what you're trying to express, Wolfgang. Please, you're so close. I see very, very clearly how my fundamental model of reality concludes and perfectly describes what you're trying to describe here. So please, you or your lackeys or your minions or some of your followers, please take this to heart because I'm fucking serious here. You're 98%, you're 87% close. And if you just understand my fundamental model of reality, triune system, you'll see that this is what you're trying to express. It's the irreducible wholeness, two things as one thing, two things as one thing. And that's not three things. It's one thing. It's one reality that's expressed through the appearance of the dualism, which is the superposition, right? The particle isn't in a superposition. The wave function isn't in a superposition. The superposition is the reality, and the way it's expressed is through the appearance of the dualities. And the way to transcend it is to transcend thought.
Time, the psychic realm is subject to time but not to space?
The thought realm. The psychic, it's not the psychic realm, it's just thought. Just call it what it is, non-physical thought, which is also mathematics. Mathematics is relating to all thought. It's completely abstract. It is the thought realm. And the illusion is that it's actually expressing a truth about the physical realm, and that's quantity, right? But you would understand, Wolfgang, that the quantity that's made up. That connection that mathematics is making between the physical realm and the thought realm through quantity and counting is wrong. And this is where we both agree. And it's very important that we latch onto this agreement and try to make a model that has no loose ends anymore. Because yours does. It just does.
And our corporeal realm is obviously corporeal, so it's subject
Physical.
clearly to time and space.
More space than time, but yes.
So
Yes.
we mustn't think, and obviously we're one thing, we're one organism.
Yes, you are one
There are
irreducible
three.
whole. So
I don't.
if you're one irreducible whole and you have the exact same aspects of God being triune in nature, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, spirit, body, mind, it's the same thing. My fundamental model of reality is a message from God telling you that you are God.
Has three parts. You won't find an eternal Wolfgang Smith and
Because there's no
corporeal
Wolfgang Smith, right?
Wolfgang Smith as a
That's
person.
Wolfgang Smith is the thought aspect of the ego, and the body is the body aspect, the physical aspect.
Is composed of these three
Because
levels.
you're the same entity, you're
But
the
these
same
three
being.
levels are one organism.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
incidentally, this is
Same. You are
so to
God.
speak,
You're God.
the
You're God.
fundamental fact about the Platonist cosmology, and this fundamental fact throws a new light on everything, and it has tremendous scientific implications, so much so that you cannot have any kind of deeper science that doesn't recognize this tripartite nature. So
Non-conceptuality is the new philosophy. It's the new science. It is the evolution of it's science 2.0.
obviously the physicist knows nothing about it, cannot know anything about it, because the very conceptions needed to define the tripartite cosmos
And
or
it's
the tripartite.
they try to express it dualistically as the thing nothing model. And it doesn't work because it produces paradox immediately. Is nothing in the state of it, in the set of everything? How does something come from nothing? And how does non-existence exist? How does nothing exist? Right?
Anthropos.
So yes, it has to include a trinity. Any fundamental model of reality can't be dualistic, can't be the other ofs, other than, it has to be other of.
Logical ideas which cannot really, which are incomprehensible to the physicist, because the physicist deals only with quantitative realities,
right.
something
It's
that
quantity and set theory specifically. What is a set? It's one. Set theory is the process of transmitting senses into the number one, into the most basic form of thought. So this is what set theory does, which is the base of mathematics basically, is that it takes Oh, I lost my thought because I got a message up here.
Can therefore be described, say, in a differential equation. You can't write a differential equation for spiritus. You can't write a differential equation for the psychic realm.
I hope I don't run out of
And actually, you
space.
can't write the differential equation for the corporeal world either. Because strictly speaking, the physicist qua physicist knows nothing about the corporeal world. Nada. Nothing. Because you cannot have a corporeal world consisting only of quantity.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter how you want,
again,
what kind
it's
of
trying
quantity, whether
to,
you want to
Maya
talk
is
about
trying
the
to
differentiable manifold.
connect,
Doesn't
make
matter.
a correlation,
Mathematics
make a
is
connection
one thing,
between the physical realm and the thought realm, and it doesn't exist.
The world is not a mathematical entity.
No, math exists only in the thought realm, the non-physical thought realm.
As soon as you have even a little glimmering of the Platonist cosmology, you see how utterly blind our modern intellectuals are. Whether they are actually scientists capable of working with differential equations is secondary. The point is that practically every intellectual in our day has been metaphysically formed on the basis of mathematical physics. And that means that he is incapable of understanding even the first thing about reality. Once you see it, you see the tragedy of it. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy. We think that we know more than people ever knew, when in fact, strictly speaking, we know nothing. I would really call it nothing, because these physical models, and it doesn't
It's
matter
even worse.
what kind of models.
It's leading
It
into
can be a
delusion.
model with infinite dimensions.
It's worse than knowing nothing because we believe that it's truth and it's leading us into delusion. So it's actually worse than knowing nothing. Believing that you know something when it's wrong is worse than knowing nothing.
It doesn't matter. The point is you're doing mathematics, you're doing differential equations. And what the discoveries that you make are of the kind that can then, in principle, be tested by a physical experiment. So, wonderful. It's very interesting. I myself was very fascinated by this. But the point is, it tells you nothing about the real world in its integrality. And worse than that, it makes you believe that there is nothing other.
Right, so on that note, there's a physicist named Brian Greene. He was speaking 2 years ago or so, and he was saying, free will doesn't exist. Why? Well, show me where it is. Because the physics gives rise to chemistry, which gives rise to the cellular, which gives rise to your brain, and so on. So show me. If you're going to say something exists, point to it. Where is physics failing?
That is sheer nonsense. I mean, it is sad that a human being, presumably with good intentions,
He's talking about Brian Greene.
a lot of
I
education,
love it.
is capable of speaking such utter nonsense. Because, look at this table. No physicist has ever understood or will ever understand A, that this table is brown, and B, that you and I and every other normal human being can see it. In a sense, you can say that our physicists are the most ignorant people in the whole world, because every child knows that this table is a table. Every child knows that this is hard and brown and so on. And incidentally, in this connection, I want to say something very...
See, it really goes deeper than this, is that those words, hard and brown, they actually, it's just you believing that they relate to something in the senses, that they're relating to the senses. That connection is, even that connection is made up, right? Is that these words, the thoughts, they are connected and relate to the senses only in the way that we believe them to,
very,
not in
very
any
important.
fundamental, essential way.
For centuries, ever since the 17th century when our civilization went off the rails, it has been assumed that visual perception is a matter of light hitting the retina, setting up currents going into the cortex of the brain, etc., etc. There are 20 or 21 visual centers in the brain, and whole libraries have been filled with papers and books describing the results of this experimental work, which is very interesting. The trouble is that it tells you nothing about how we actually perceive. And Sir Francis Crick, one of the discoverers of DNA, he then became very fascinated in this theory of visual perception, and at the end of his studies he writes, we see how the brain takes a picture apart, we do not yet see how the brain puts the picture together.
It's all narrative.
The first half of what you said is obviously true.
There's no way to ever really understand.
We do know a lot about what happens in these neuronal currents. There are two ways of doing physics. There is the classical way, which is subcorporeal. I will assume that we know that, and so from an ontological perspective, there are two kinds of physics, because you can do classical physics, which is subcorporeal, and you can do quantum theory, which is transcorporeal, and it follows from the Platonist ontology that in subcorporeal physics, we're dealing with objects that possess being, and in transcorporeal physics, we deal with objects that do not possess being. And the point is that being comes from the aeviternal plane. It doesn't come from below, from some quirky realm of quantum particles. This is all nonsense. Our being comes from the aeviternal realm, and that's why it is being, because it is an irreducible wholeness, and physics cannot deal with irreducible wholes.
Science is measurement. Measurement requires two. So science is, that's so fuzzy on. Science is a tool that separates things, right, in its measurement, because it requires two. So it's a scalpel that splits things in two, and they're trying to use a scalpel to find unity.
Because it can only deal with wholes which are sums of parts. For an irreducible whole, you cannot write a differential equation, because if it were described by the differential equation, it would ipso facto be reducible to its parts. The reason you can write differential equations that mean something is because you're dealing with things that are a composite.
You're creating the appearance of separateness and distinction. Science creates the appearance. Well, thought creates the appearance first of objects, and then it goes deeper with mathematics, that they add another thought on top of that, superimpose it as quantity.
Do you think this is
freaking
related
mess.
to Richard Feynman's sum over paths? That is reductionism and sum over parts?
Marvels, but at the same time, it is a reductio of ad absurdum of particle physics.
This question comes from Matthew Wyden, again, a fan of yours, and has watched plenty of.
With a little hocus pocus, you can get the right answer.
Right.
It's
So
a very interesting problem. Nature and the early physicists was actually,
CERN.
when you look at
Yeah.
something like our CERN, the Particle Physics Center, Unziger wrote a book about CERN where he shows how absolutely absurd physics a la CERN has become. Physics a la CERN is no longer physics, it's no longer science. And it's a very expensive game they're playing. But physics a la CERN has actually rendered particle physics an absurdity. It is a reductio ad absurdum of particle physics. And I very much.
So here's the thing about CERN is that why does it require so much energy to detect these particles when it takes very little energy to create a telescope and operate a telescope to witness, right, to observe the physical realm? Why does it require very little energy? Whereas that the observation seems to not take much energy to engage in observing. But what's going on at CERN maybe isn't observation. What if it's creation? Why does it take so much energy and these incredibly specialized devices, mechanical devices, and massive magnets using immense amounts of energy to detect these particles? Well, what if they're actually projecting them? And isn't it convenient that the only way to ever see these particles is, of course, not directly, is through these instruments that thought has taught? So that it comes up with a theory that says, oh, well, we're going to predict that there's a particle here. And then they're going to think about it, and then they're going to think a lot about it and build a really complex tool to verify the theory. So, okay, so then that the device brings about the appearance of the Higgs boson, let's say. Oh, it pops in for 1 gazillionth of a second, and they see what they're looking for. So therefore, it's verified that that theory is correct. But what if their interpretation is incorrect and they haven't found it, but they've created it? So in this way, physics is a dog chasing its own tail. Because it's creating what it's projecting, what it's predicting. And then it goes, waha, look it, I'm right.
Panorama of CERN, particle physics a la CERN, it's absurd.
Yeah. Is CERN like CERN?
CE, yeah. It's an acronym for the French name Centre Énergie Research. It's a nuclear physics center which marvels, but at the same time, I feel that if you want to approach these great truths, the truth of Christianity and the Judeo-Christian tradition, you cannot do it by starting from the contemporary Weltanschauung. You cannot do it, strictly speaking, as a man of the 21st century. You have to do it, you have to go back to the basis.
We have to go back to find the truth, because what we've assumed to be true has been incorrect, and we need to fix that. We can't keep going forward. We have to go back and see where our errors have been.
Understand it basically, and I think this applies not only to Kastrup, it's sort of a typical thing. We have a lot of intellectuals today who are basically respectful of the great traditions, which is in itself wonderful because
But none of these
the typical
thinkers
thing
want
is
to
just the
conclude
opposite.
thought,
The typical thing in our,
because
if
that
you go to
might
our
conclude
universities
their
and you get out
paychecks.
of them still believing in God, you are one of the chosen few, because the thrust of it all is, I call it satanic, because I think it basically it is. They are on
Maya.
the opposite side. But the people that you are referring to now, there's a whole group of them. It is very much to their credit that they are respectful of the Christianity and the other great traditions, and they want to understand. They think that there's truth there, and they want to understand it. But they want to understand it, so to speak, starting out more or less from the contemporary Weltanschauung. And I think this is absolutely the wrong place to start, because if we were in any way schooled or versed in the true metaphysics and the true Christianity, let us say, we would realize that the contemporary Weltanschauung is nonsense. It's a disease.
It's the thing and nothing.
It's a
That's
little
it.
bit like poison.
Thing and nothing.
It poisons you.
The
And
dualistic,
so the idea of interpreting Christianity
other than.
in terms that connect with our contemporary physicists or our contemporary psychologists or whatever you find in the contemporary culture is, in a sense, to lose before you've even started. You cannot understand Christianity from the direction of physics or any other contemporary strand of thought, whether it's psychology or what have you. We are in a completely different culture, and the only way to gain access to Christianity is to start from the beginning. That means on a scriptural basis. There's the Old and the New Testament, and there are the commentaries of the great Christian teachers, the St. Augustine and the St. Thomas Aquinas. That's how you can learn. And once you have a certain insight into Christianity,
don't
you
follow
can,
Christianity.
of course, engage.
Just give up. It's you can't. There's no way to get where. There's no way to get where you need to go in the short amount of time by following Christianity and trying to figure out all that. It's not effective. Christianity is ineffective. It just is.
You can.
It's been too.
Listen to what they have to say.
It's too materialistically based.
Explain what is right and what is not right, and
dualistic, materialistic.
Fellow man find their way into the traditional teaching, but you can't get into the traditional teaching from the direction of contemporary thought. There's no way.
Is it more accurate to say that the corporeal realm is a reduction of the avaternal or an expression of the avaternal?
More of an expression.
Well,
like a hologram.
The actually correct answer, I think, to this question is that whatever has any kind of being in the corporeal world, for example, this table, originates in the avaternal. So if you ask, what is this table? What is it? The contemporary person will start talking about atoms and this and that.
A thing is a specific combination of senses, agreed upon combination, specific combination of senses, right? A spoon is a specific, agreed upon combination of sensations.
Which has nothing to do with metaphysics. This is something.
So you can't describe a physical object. What is a physical object? Through more physical objects. You can't describe an object physically by just adding more physical attributes to it. That actually is taking away from what that thing is, really.
Else entirely. Metaphysically, if you want to understand what this table actually is, what the being is that manifests as this table, you are led unquestionably back to the avidernal realm.
And to abide, actually abide in that realm, you need to observe without bias, which means not even saying the word table. As soon as the word table enters your consciousness, you've gone too far.
Because what is not illusory, what is not perishable, what is actually real in this table, and there must be something like that, otherwise,
Yes, something unchanging.
even the illusion of the table couldn't arise.
Yeah.
So what is real, what is actual being
Is your awareness.
Located, originates in the avidernal plane.
Which is awareness.
In the same way that we say a baby originates from a mother, we don't say a baby is a reduction of a mother or a baby is an expression of the mother. Is it similar like that or different?
I would say it's a little different because the connection that I was trying to verbalize.
It's a pre more than a post, right?
It's
purely
before
the mother even. It's not after the mother.
Of course, the only way we
prior
can
to the mother.
Understand it in a human way is to add the fiction to spatialize. You say, all right, let this plane be corporeal, and up here you have another plane is avidernal. So we sort of make a mental picture of it, which is not really what we want to express, but it's a means of expressing. So in other words, we must add a little bit of falsity in order to express the metaphysical truth.
This also comes from Matthew Wyden. These are wise questions coming from him. What do you think of the patristic formulation that love is the coexistence of unity and multiplicity?
Love is pure acceptance without bias, which is thought-free.
I would have to really think. Mysteries, one can say, using ideas or terminology from quantum theory or cognitive psychology and so forth, I feel no need for that. And I am skeptical about it too. In other words, not only are the truths of Christianity sacred, but in a sense, the words, the language, and the conceptions which go back to the patristic era have a sacredness of their own. And so I tend to be skeptical about modern day gurus who will use a completely different language. I feel no need for that.
Just subtle
as I
tweaks.
say, I tend to be skeptical that it's really going to work, because not only is the sacred truth sacred, the means of expression are also sacred. The very words that have fallen from the lips, say, of the apostles
You're putting too much
are
onto it.
sacred. And
Only the silence is sacred.
why should I listen to Professor so-and-so? I'd much rather listen to St. Paul
Aren't you a
or
professor?
St. Augustine, St. Maximus.
Ramana Maharshi.
I mean, they are the people who understood these things. They are the people who attained them also in varying degrees in their own life. Why should I listen to somebody, professor from University of Chicago? What does he know?
Well,
And why do I need him?
so the same thing can be asked of you, Wolfgang. You also have declared that you don't know this stuff, that you haven't attained it. So why should we listen to you?
Professor, thank you for spending so much time with me. What's next for you?
What's next for me, my friend, is to prepare myself to enter into the life beyond this one.
Then you really need to talk to me, and you really need to engage in this practice. You need to engage in the practice. That is the way to prepare, is to transcend thought and the voice in your head. That's it. So I really think that you're brilliant, and I really think that you're on to something, and I know you feel intuitively how thought is incorrect, but you don't want to come out and say something that drastic, that extreme, that it is exactly the voice in your head. But that's what those sadhus were doing. They're sitting there, thought-free, in the state of pure being. And that's it. That's the whole crux. So this is really important stuff, and I feel like that non-conceptuality completes everything that you're talking about. And it'd be cool if we could have a conversation. I mean this sincerely. I do think that you're really, really close, and our theories have more things in common than not in common. So I guess an olive branch or something. I would like to talk with you or some of your followers. Okay. Awesome.